Yeah, so I kind of have to actually follow up on Philip's first question. And actually, maybe I'm less cynical than Philip is, and I'm a little less worried about the nefarious person and a little bit more worried about the inadvertent, implicit meaning that gets put into these games. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. And then actually, I've got a good anecdote from actually your class, Philip, which I think is hilarious. But so I guess the curator is an important role, right? Because the curator is deciding what the content in this game is. And one of the things you said early was that one of the tricks in city planning is to present two options that are bad and one option that is good, right. And then the person picks that. And that this would have more transparency. But if games are about making choices and being presented with content that you have to choose from, it sounds like we've just made a more complicated system of putting in choices. And so it's like the curator has a tremendous amount of responsibility. And like I said, I'm less worried about them being nefarious and more worried about a situation that happened with a game I was playing. They were trying to model the growth of families in a game. And they had a mechanic in which a character could die and they no longer count. The goal is to try to grow your family as large as you can. So an action might be taken, a character dies, and they go in a graveyard. Also, if you get divorced.
Is this a Mormon game?
No, I don't know. Also, if you get divorced, the divorced person goes in the graveyard pile. Right? And mechanically it makes total sense, right? Because just your family got smaller. But they hadn't even really considered what the implicit meaning of putting a divorced person in a graveyard pile is to the game, right? And they just, I mean, it's something that seasoned game designers don't always understand and don't always get, right? Yeah. You know, like what is the meaning of putting I don't know, a sex mini game in God of War? Does it really contribute to the game content and meaning wise, you know? And, so I kind of feel like that's a lot of power for a curator who's probably not going to be a game designer to kind of manage that sort of content. I think about like someone else's shoes, right? I mean, are there 2 black characters and 3 white characters? What if there's no Latino characters? Do I see myself? Is there a transgendered character and I'm transgender? Do I feel left out of this community? I mean, like all of this stuff is like, you know, games are kind of artistic expression. It's hard to kind of rip that out so that you just have a system for.
Right, but you've got to. I mean, you've got to simplify it, right? I mean, that's you have to do that in a game. It's not like you can. I mean, with your example of the transgendered character, it's not like you can represent absolutely everybody. What you can do is you can try to get to a point where you at least appear as though you're being inclusive, right. You know, and I think that's as much as we can hope for. And it may offend, again, that may offend people because they're not represented in those characters. But does that something that stops you from making the game in the first place?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think this kind of gets coupled with Owen's concern, which is that you know, should a person who's good at this game have more of a voice? And you know, so obviously this wouldn't be the only way to engage in the planning decisions, right? Just through this game. So obviously, if I had a complaint and I was passionate about it and I cared about it, but I would be concerned that like, yeah, but look at the data from this game. Like this is, you know, this is only one set, and it sounds like there's a little bit of an issue with regards to how planners are communicating with the community. And so I guess if you're just giving them more tools to communicate in a more complicated way.
But look, I mean, but if what typically happens in a planning process is that, you know, there's a couple dots on a wall and the planners put that together and then they come back to the community and said, this is what you said. There's a huge simplification going on there. While we may be simplifying, what we're doing is in breaking it up into 6 possible themes and in giving it that kind of nuance, we're avoiding this is what you said. We're not going to go back to the community and say you know, this and this is exactly also why we decided that you can spend the coins in any way you want, so that you're going to have like, you know, 60% here, maybe 52% here. It's not going to be like you have to vote for one of the 6 where you're going to get, you know, you're not going to get the kind of nuance that I think you're going to get when you have this sort of coin spending system. I think if you go back to the community and say this is the breakdown, let's start there in our discussion. See, this is the other thing that we have to consider here, is that this is only part of the process that leads into hopefully a face-to-face conversation, and then you can actually use this as a springboard, and maybe people will even say, well, some people had too much power in this game, and that's okay. And that's the lovely thing about having a game that's designed both for face-to-face and for remote participation, because you can put some of those things into check. I mean, it's the same as you know, designing a game for a classroom as an example. If you have the presence of the teacher, you don't have to be there's some of the things you don't have to be as responsible for because you have this human being that can be in place to at least discourse about those issues.
I think one other thing too is, kind of just elaborating what you said, having someone that comes to the meeting and says, well, these 4 kids got 30 million coins and this is what they said, and having that as a starting point for the discussion in the meeting is still a better starting point than a lot of the complaining that happens in the meeting, because it's something they can all talk about and they all have a stake in. In our Chinatown meeting, I remember one time we asked somebody, what would your, they were playing as characters, and then they kind of ripped off the name tag and themselves. What would your character think about this decision? And they were like, well, I don't care what my character thinks. I know what you're trying to do, and So it doesn't always work. I mean, they get it. And so, that opened up a new conversation in the meeting. And again, in those meetings, everyone had something to talk about, and it was because they all played the game. And that's better than just having those 5 people that know what they want to talk about.
Okay, I was actually going to say a bunch of the same things that Dave said. But I was going to ask also, so one of the things I'm wondering about is this seems kind of like a system of education and then democratic action built into one system. So it's kind of like, you're learning about this thing and you're kind of voting on it kind of as you learn about it. I guess what I'm wondering is, so it seems like you're getting something from having a game. You're getting something rather, like you could just have an online direct voting system where you give people the 6 choices and just say, here's all your coins, spend them now. Like, why do you have to spend them 2 minutes a day over 6 weeks? And it seems to me, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you want people, by engaging in the weekly game, to maybe learn something about how these things work and maybe make a choice during the gaming process, or because of how the gaming process is designed, that they wouldn't necessarily have made before that process.
That's exactly right. I mean, you said that there's a learning system and a democratic process, and I would say that the democratic process should always involve a learning system. That when one of the problems with our democratic process too often is that we resort to like a simple voting process, and we don't think about all the complexity that should go on before the vote happens. And the nature of deliberation as a sort of democratic concept is actually something that is premised on a baseline understanding of the issue before people deliberate. And so if the whole concept here is that there is this capacity building element, that there is a learning that should take place. And one of the things that one of the ways that we're going to look at this data is we want to see actually if people shift around their coins, during the game, because that'll be a really interesting thing to find out. But to bring in to marry the learning process with this deliberation process is precisely what we want to be doing, and people should be informed about these issues, because this is the problem with urban planning. It's a problem with anything. I mean, if I brought a bunch of people into a room to talk about global warming without really without giving the people in that room any kind of baseline understanding of the issues, then we're going to get a reactionary conversation about the issue. So the best way of creating a good conversation is by giving people sort of a baseline from which to respond to the issue from. So so in this case, in urban planning, urbanism is quite complex, in fact, and when asked to respond to urban issues, people do resort to what they understand. Their very personal experience, which actually can be quite useful, but that personal experience, and this is what I said at the very beginning, that local knowledge married with expert knowledge, if we can figure out a way to bring those things together and to use that as the mechanism from which people deliberate, then we're onto something. So I think that the whole purpose of the game is to educate, is to engage, so that when they come to the place of having to make a decision about their neighborhood, it's informed.
So that makes a lot of sense to me. That is where I think about the curator thing, like we were talking about before, because the way you educate, obviously, the constraints of how you educate people completely dictates the constraints of democratic possibility. So I mean, if it's somebody at the top deciding how to educate, it's in some ways kind of shaping what's possible in the democratic system, right? The people on the bottom can't, for example, I can't choose, I don't like those 6 things. I want to do something else.
Yeah, I had a
so
sort of the same
well, I
question.
guess just so I can finish. I just want to. I don't think it's a bad idea. What you're saying makes sense. I think education is totally important, and I think that education just doesn't happen completely at random from the bottom. But I do feel like, I mean, in a democracy, the people on the bottom's ability to change the rules of the game is partially what makes it an actual democracy. And I don't see any way for the players to change the rules of the game that they're in this. And I'm wondering, like, do I get to, like, what if one of the things I get to spend my coins on is I don't like how the game is designed? Or I think there should be different categories. Or this model is not a model I agree with. It's not that they think the whole thing is a bad idea, but I just feel like, by creating the particular, you said that you have to simplify things, and you're totally correct, absolutely. But the simplification you're choosing is something that understanding better how people contest that simplification and think about it and negotiate it might be an interesting thing to include. Now, as you're saying, maybe you're confident in leaving that in the face-to-face afterwards. I'm not saying that's bad. That could be cool. That could work. But that sort of is assuming that the face-to-face happens, that it happens really well, and everything goes according to plan. Again, I don't want to oversell the criticism. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. But I'm just wondering, would it break the whole idea to include some kind of self-changing rule set in the system to actually allow the citizens to actually affect the government, quote unquote, that they're in, which is the game?
No, that's an interesting point. The values are we're gonna provide a template of these themes, of possible themes, and then the curator can either use those or create their own, right? So it's going. You're right. It's a sort of top down, like, this is what we think is important. I think it is important for somebody to say, my issue doesn't fit into any of these values. We hope that the values are conceived in such a way where whatever issue one has, it can fit into one of those prescribed themes. But it could be that that is a framing of the narrative that people might feel is a bit heavy-handed. So I actually agree with you that finding a way to spend your coins on creating a new value, as an example.
Sure.
That might be sort of a write-in candidate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could have, exactly. That might be a cool, like, final thing to have in there, and that might be an interesting way to address that.
Yeah, I think that the game still feels like, as the curator is saying, like, these are the quests, and in the learning process, there is something that the planners should also learn from the community itself, right? There's one of they are the ones who live there, that work there. And I think that the way that this is being, at least at the high level, it seems to me that it's still from the planning and the curator to the community. But what is the way that you're giving the community to communicate back? Maybe one of the quests is people telling what is their favorite place in that environment.
Yeah,
that's in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all that stuff's in there. Yeah.
Can I add two things? So the first point is, again, this is a platform, so we're designing for the best case scenario. We'll have a very extensive curriculum and suggestions. With the communities working in now, they are working with the CDC. They're in the community, and they're developing this content with the community. So it's not necessarily. There could be a possibility where a planning agency takes over everything, but I think our suggestion would be to work with the community. Come up with those 5 characters. There's still problems there, but if it's the community coming up with those characters, then that's a little different. In Chinatown, these values right now are from Chinatown, the master planning process that the community came up with. Those are their values. We didn't kind of come up with those on our own. And again, in planning, there's a visioning process. So maybe if the planner knows they want to use this game, they could say, we're planning for this game. Let's work together to come up with what these themes will be. So again,
it's like a pre-game.
Yeah, so the planning process has, there's visioning, and they end up, developing something at the end. But our hope would be that they would bring the community in early and start building a game the community wants to have. So that we can't, of course, guarantee that because we're just putting it out there. So.
First of all, I think what Matt said is exactly what I want to focus on. especially now where you say it's kind of like designing the game. It's kind of like the learning process for the curators. Like for the people who design the game, that's a very important learning process, and I think it might be important to stress it out for them. But I think what is the central problem that most people feel that they don't have the power to participate in urban planning or participate at all. Like that's the reason why most people don't vote, because they think they don't have a chance anyway. And I think this could be the cool thing about this game, or the weak spot. You know, what if you have a community that do the game after completely participating, then it comes out, you know, we need more parking space, and the people go like, yeah, but we don't care. You know, like it's not gonna happen. And that's I think if you would have somebody who says, by the way, we really take it serious, like, because I think that's going to be your problem. Most people don't participate anymore because they think they're powerless. And to kind of like get in the position where they now are in the power position to provoke change and to provoke somebody really making a decision on the basis of their thoughts. I think that's the tricky part. And I think if this doesn't work very well, like if they don't have that feeling, they will not really play the game and they will not take it seriously.
Well, that's right. I mean, and this is why it's important this is why the kind of live meetup thing is very important, because the idea is that if we can get, if we can get city officials, if we can get the planners in the room, so people have a sense that they're not just putting stuff into this game just for fun, like somebody's listening. And so I think there's this trust element that's involved. People feel like they need to trust both the people that are curating the game, so that has to be, hopefully will come from a community development corporation or some sort of community organization, and then they need to trust that they're being listened to, and that's a hard part. So it could very well be that you say really all I want is a 100-acre park in this neighborhood, and that's all I want. But as it turns out, you don't get that. You personally might feel slighted. But if, in fact, what happens in the game is that you get to see your opinion in relation to other opinions, and you get to see that actually this is a community process, and just because your opinion isn't being listened to, you understand the larger context, and that's a good thing. Now, if it so happens, and this is a problem that planners are concerned with, if it so happens that the entire community wants that 100-acre park, and of course there's no money for that, where's the public money going to come from, and it never gets built, then that's a huge problem, because now you have this transparent record of the community saying this is what we want. I think that's a good thing, because I think that's the kind of community dynamic that should be taking place, where decision makers need to confront community sentiment, even if it's not what they agree with. But I know that is a problem for the way that people are going to adopt this, because of just that. Because this is what I talked about with managing expectations. That planners don't want to inflate expectations of the community in a way that's unrealistic. And I see why. I mean, I understand that, because we're talking about things that require hundreds of millions of dollars to get done. So it's not like, so it's not like you can say something and just get it. I mean, these are big processes. The question is how does a community feel like they've gone through a process, and even if they don't get what they want, they feel the process is just. And I think this is another sort of tenet of a democratic process. I mean, a democracy works when after a vote you don't take up arms, right? I mean, that's like, because you at least have this sort of thin trust in the process that it kind of worked, even if your candidate didn't get elected, kind of worked. And so, if that's when you develop a democratic process like this, then hopefully you have that same system where the user base has a generalized trust in the process. Even if, I mean, and this goes back to what you were saying, I don't remember your name, but even if it's sort of an overly liberal process in the sense that there's no real mechanism for radical change, I think that you could still work within that, but I think that if you give people the sense that the game allows for at least a rethinking of the structure, even if they don't get it, I think that's a good possibility. So, but again, it's like, how do you build this game where you have trust every step of the way, and you don't get people who are at the end, because it's the stakes are high. in this game. So it's like if the game fails, then the community process fails.
But as you said, you need a game designer like that is going for that spot. You know, like if you have somebody who says like, in the end, I won't have a back parking space that we have the money for anyway. So you know, like I kind of like lead them there.
Yeah.
So and I'm not sure if there are a lot of politicians out there that are ready to say, well, I really want my community to rethink and come up with problems I don't even see. That's pretty cool. Like I want to vote this person, but you know, like the system doesn't really run like that. But I think that comes back to the problem where to be really clear that it's kind of like it's a provoking process for the community to come up with their values. And I think the politician or whoever's in charge has to understand that. I think as long as he knows that, it's fine. The moment he thinks this is a tool to get them where I want,
Yeah.
it's getting a bit dangerous too. I think that's the other bit.